Reality is not what happens to you. Reality is what you are. This single recognition contains the entire teaching of Advaita Vedanta, the ancient wisdom tradition that dissolves the fundamental illusion creating all human suffering. The illusion is simple. You believe you are separate from reality. You believe you are a person in a world, navigating circumstances, accepting or rejecting what life presents. But Advaita points to something far more radical. You are not in reality. You are reality itself, temporarily appearing as this particular form, experiencing itself through these particular senses, knowing itself through this particular awareness. When you understand this, not as a philosophical concept but as the living truth of what you are, acceptance stops being something you must practice. It becomes what naturally occurs when the false division between self and world is seen through. Because what is there to accept or reject when you recognize that what appears to be happening to you is actually happening as you? The ocean does not accept its waves. The waves are made of ocean. They are ocean appearing in this particular form, arising and subsiding according to the nature of water and wind and gravity. In the same way, what you call your life, with all its circumstances and experiences, is consciousness appearing in this particular form, arising and subsiding according to the nature of consciousness itself. But the mind does not want to hear this. The mind is built on the premise of being separate. It exists as the constant activity of dividing experience into me and not me, mine and not mine, what I want and what I do not want. This division is so fundamental to ordinary consciousness that questioning it seems absurd. Of course there is a me here and a world out there. Of course things happen to me that I must either accept or change. Of course my well-being depends on circumstances being favorable rather than unfavorable. This is so obvious that it feels like the bedrock of reality itself. And yet, Advaita Vedanta asks you to question this bedrock. It asks you to investigate whether this apparently separate self that experiences the world actually exists when you look for it directly, not as a concept, not as a belief you are supposed to adopt, but through immediate observation of what is actually present in your experience right now. When you look for the self that is supposedly separate from reality, what do you actually find? You find thoughts about a self. You find sensations in a body. You find memories and preferences and fears. But the actual entity, the solid, continuous, independent self you take yourself to be, cannot be located anywhere except as another thought appearing in the awareness you are investigating. This is not a subtle teaching. This is as direct as pointing can be. Right now, whatever is happening in your experience, you are aware of it. Thoughts are arising, and you are aware of them. Sensations are present, and you are aware of them. Perceptions are occurring, and you are aware of them. This awareness is undeniable. Even if you doubt everything else, you cannot doubt that awareness is present, because the doubting itself is known by awareness. So there is awareness, and this awareness is not separate from what it is aware of. The separation is conceptual, imposed after the fact by thought. In the immediacy of direct experience, there is no gap between awareness and what appears in awareness. There is simply this seamless happening, this undivided reality, this moment, exactly as it is. When you recognize this, when you see clearly that you are not separate from what is appearing, the entire relationship to experience transforms. You are no longer someone to whom things are happening. You are the happening itself. And what is there to resist about yourself? What is there to reject about your own being? The resistance that creates suffering is always the resistance of a separate self against reality. But when the separate self is seen to be unreal, when it is recognized as a pattern of thought rather than as an actual entity, resistance loses its ground. What remains is simply what is. And what is always acceptable because it is what you are. This does not mean you become passive. This is the misunderstanding that stops most people from genuine inquiry into the nature of the self. They believe that if there is no separate self, if everything is just happening without a doer, then nothing matters, and there is no reason to do anything. But this misses the point entirely. Action continues. Preferences continue. Choices continue. The body continues to move through the world, responding to circumstances, engaging with life. What changes is the sense that there is a separate entity at the center of all this who is doing it, who is experiencing it, who must manage it and control it and make it turn out right. When this sense of a separate controller dissolves, action becomes more appropriate, not less, because the action is no longer filtered through the defended position of a self that needs reality to be a certain way in order to be okay. The action arises from the totality, responding to what is actually present rather than to what should be present according to the mind's preferences. This is what Advaita calls natural action, action that flows from understanding rather than from the compulsive reactivity of a self in fear. And this understanding changes the meaning of acceptance completely. In ordinary consciousness, acceptance is something you do. You are faced with a circumstance you did not want, and you make a decision to accept it rather than resist it. You practice acceptance as a spiritual discipline, as a way to reduce suffering, as a technique for finding peace in the midst of difficulty. And this has value. Learning to accept what cannot be changed is far better than wasting energy in futile resistance. But this is still happening from the position of a separate self. There is still a you who is accepting something that is happening to you. Advaita points to a deeper acceptance, not the acceptance you practice, but the acceptance that is the nature of what you are, when the illusion of separation is seen through. When you recognize that you are not separate from what is appearing, acceptance is not something you choose. It is simply what is already the case. The ocean does not choose to accept its waves. The space in a room does not choose to accept the objects that appear in it. The acceptance is inherent in the recognition of what you actually are. You are the space in which all experience appears, not a space that is empty and dead, but the living, conscious space of awareness itself. And this space is never disturbed by what appears in it. Thoughts appear in awareness, and awareness remains unchanged. Emotions move through awareness, and awareness remains unchanged. Circumstances shift and transform, and awareness remains unchanged. What you are is this unchanging awareness, and everything that seems to happen to you is simply appearing in what you are without ever touching what you are. This is why the ancient teachers of Advaita use the metaphor of the screen and the movie. The movie can be tragic or comedic, violent or peaceful, beautiful or ugly, but the screen on which the movie plays is never affected by the content of the movie. Fire on the screen does not burn the screen. Water on the screen does not wet the screen. Death on the screen does not end the screen. The screen remains exactly what it is, regardless of what appears on it. And you are like this screen, not the content of your experience, but the awareness in which all content appears. And this awareness is never actually affected by any content, no matter how intense, no matter how painful, no matter how wonderful. When this is genuinely recognized, suffering ends. Not the direct pain of life, not the grief of loss or the physical sensation of illness or injury, but the psychological suffering, the suffering that comes from believing you are someone to whom something wrong is happening. This suffering is built entirely on the illusion of separation. When the separation is seen through, when you recognize that what you are is never touched by what appears, the suffering dissolves. Not because circumstances change, but because the relationship to circumstances is fundamentally transformed. A man loses his job. From the perspective of the separate self, this is a disaster. The mind immediately begins its catastrophic thinking. How will I survive? What will people think? I have failed. My future is ruined. And all of this creates enormous suffering. But from the perspective of Advaita, from the recognition of what you actually are, the job loss is simply what is appearing in consciousness right now. It is a change in circumstances, a movement in the field of experience. The body may need to respond, may need to look for another job, may need to adjust to new conditions. But there is no separate self that is threatened by this change. There is simply consciousness, aware of this particular configuration of experience, responding appropriately without the layer of psychological suffering that comes from believing you are a vulnerable entity at the mercy of circumstances. This is the freedom Advaita points to, not freedom from circumstances. Circumstances will always be changing. Life will always be presenting challenges and difficulties along with pleasures and joys. but freedom from the suffering that comes from taking yourself to be a separate self that needs circumstances to be a certain way. When you recognize what you actually are, when you see that you are the awareness in which all circumstances appear, rather than a person to whom circumstances happen, you are already free. And this freedom is not conditional. It does not depend on having good circumstances, or pleasant experiences, or a calm mind. It is the nature of what you are, prior to all circumstances, prior to all experiences, prior to all mental states. But how do you come to this recognition? Advaita is clear that you cannot achieve it through effort. The effort to become awakened is the activity of the separate self, and the separate self is precisely what must be seen through. So the path, if it can be called a path, is not about adding something or becoming something. It is about seeing clearly what is already the case. It is about recognizing that the separate self you take yourself to be is a construction of thought with no independent reality. This recognition often begins with simple observation. You notice that you are aware of your thoughts. This is undeniable. Thoughts arise and you know they are arising. So you cannot be the thoughts because you are observing them. The observer cannot be the observed. In the same way, you are aware of emotions, aware of sensations, aware of perceptions. All of this is appearing in awareness. And awareness itself is not an appearance. It is what knows all appearances. It is prior to all appearances. It is what you are before any thought about what you are arises. When you rest in this recognition, when attention returns again and again to the simple fact of being aware, the identification with the content of awareness begins to loosen. You start to notice that you are not the story the mind tells about who you are. You are not the person with this history and this personality and these preferences. You are the awareness in which this person appears. And this awareness is vast, open, unlimited. It has no boundaries because it is not an object with a location. It is the space itself, the consciousness itself, in which all objects and all locations appear. This is what Advaita means by the self, not the small self, not the personal self, but the infinite self that is all there is. And when you recognize yourself as this self, acceptance is not something you practice. It is simply what you are. Because what is there to reject about yourself? The entire universe is your own being, appearing as infinite forms, experiencing itself through infinite perspectives. And every form, every perspective, every experience is the self knowing itself. Nothing is outside of what you are. Nothing is separate from what you are. Everything is the spontaneous expression of consciousness appearing as the multiplicity while remaining always the unity. This is the wisdom of Advaita Vedanta for accepting reality. Not a technique for making peace with difficult circumstances, but the recognition that you are not separate from reality and therefore there is nothing to accept or reject. There is simply what is, and what is always what you are. The suffering comes from forgetting this. The peace comes from remembering it. And the remembering is available in every moment because what you are has never actually been forgotten. It has only been overlooked in favor of the story of being a separate self, navigating a separate world. Stop telling the story, even for a moment, and notice what remains when the story ceases. Not emptiness, not absence, but presence, being, awareness, the simple, undeniable fact of existence prior to any interpretation of existence. This is what you are. This is what has always been here. This is what is reading these words right now, knowing these words, understanding or not understanding these words, but always present, always aware, always free. Advaita Vedanta is not asking you to believe this. It is asking you to look and see if it is true. And the looking is immediate. The seeing is direct. There is no path from here to there because there is no there. There is only here, only now, only this. And this is always already acceptable because this is what you are. The universe accepting itself, consciousness knowing itself, reality experiencing itself without division, without separation, without the need for any of it to be different from what it is. This is the deepest acceptance. And it is not something you achieve. It is what you are when you stop pretending to be something else. But let us be practical about what this means in the midst of ordinary life, because the teaching of Advaita is not meant to remain as philosophy. It is meant to transform how you actually live, how you meet each moment, how you respond to what life presents. And the transformation is profound when the recognition becomes lived rather than just intellectually understood. Consider a difficult conversation you need to have. From the perspective of the separate self, this conversation is loaded with anxiety. What will they think? What if they reject me? What if I say the wrong thing? What if this damages the relationship? The mind spins with all these concerns because the separate self believes it is vulnerable, believes its worth depends on others' opinions, believes it can be diminished by words. But from the recognition of what you actually are, the conversation is simply what is appearing now. Words will be spoken, responses will arise, the outcome will be whatever the outcome is. And none of this touches what you are. The anxiety is still noticed if it arises. The care about the relationship is still present, but there is no longer the crushing weight of a self that needs this conversation to go a certain way in order to be okay. This is the practical meaning of acceptance from Advaita. Not that you become indifferent to outcomes, not that you stop caring or stop trying or stop engaging, but that the engagement happens without the overlay of psychological suffering that comes from the belief that you are a separate entity whose well-being depends on controlling how reality unfolds. You speak truthfully, you listen openly, you respond appropriately, and whatever happens is what happens. Not because you have resigned yourself to it, but because you recognize that what happens is reality happening, and reality is not separate from what you are. A woman receives a diagnosis of serious illness. The body will experience pain. Treatment will be necessary. The future has become uncertain. From the perspective of the separate self, this is unbearable. The mind races with fear. Why is this happening to me? This is unfair. I do not deserve this. My life is ruined. And beneath all of this is the fundamental terror of a self that believes it can be destroyed, that its existence is threatened, that death means the end of what it is. But from Advaita, from the recognition of what she actually is, something completely different becomes possible. The illness is met fully. The pain is felt without the layer of resistance that says, this should not be. The fear is noticed without being believed. And what remains, even in the midst of the difficulty, is the recognition that what she is was never born and cannot die. The body will eventually dissolve. This is the nature of form. But what she actually is, the consciousness in which the body appears, is not touched by the dissolution of the body any more than space is touched by the objects that appear and disappear within it. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not pretending the illness is not real or that the pain does not matter. The illness is real on the level of form. The pain matters and must be addressed. But the suffering, the psychological anguish that comes from believing you are only the body and the body's destruction is your destruction, this suffering is optional. It dissolves in the recognition of what you actually are. And when the suffering dissolves, what remains is an extraordinary capacity to meet whatever life presents with openness, with clarity, with peace that does not depend on circumstances being favorable. This peace is what Advaita calls your true nature, not a peace you create through effort or meditation or positive thinking, but the peace that is the ground of your being, always present, always available, always here when you stop overlooking it in favor of the agitated movement of the mind. The mind will continue its movement. Thoughts will arise, preferences will form. The person will continue to function in the world. But all of this is recognized as appearance, as the play of consciousness, as the spontaneous expression of what you are, rather than as the activity of a separate self that must manage everything and control everything and make sure everything turns out right. And when this recognition stabilizes, when it becomes not just an occasional glimpse, but the lived reality of your existence, acceptance is no longer something you remember to practice. It is simply how you are, not because you have achieved some special spiritual state, not because you have transcended the human condition, but because you have seen through the fundamental illusion that created the need for acceptance in the first place, the illusion of being separate from reality. When that illusion is seen clearly, when it is recognized as just a thought with no substance, what remains is the simple fact of being what you are, and what you are is reality itself, not a small part of reality, not a fragment struggling to survive in a hostile universe, but the whole of reality, temporarily appearing as this particular form, this particular perspective, this particular expression of the infinite. This is the wisdom Advaita Vedanta offers. Not a new belief system to replace your old belief system, not a practice to add to your spiritual repertoire, but a direct seeing of what is already the case. You are not who you think you are. You are not the story the mind tells. You are not the separate self that needs to accept reality, because you are not separate from reality. You are what reality is doing right here, right now, in this form. And when this is seen, truly seen, not as a concept, but as the living truth of your being, the entire question of acceptance dissolves. There is nothing to accept because there is no one to accept it. There is simply this: reality being reality, consciousness knowing consciousness, you being you, without division, without conflict, without the need for any of it to be different from what it is. And this is freedom, the only freedom that is real, the only freedom that lasts, the only freedom that does not depend on circumstances or states or achievements. The freedom of recognizing what you are and have always been, prior to the story, prior to the separate self, prior to the entire drama of seeking and finding and losing and suffering. This freedom is here now. It has always been here. It is what is reading these words, what is aware of this moment, what is being this existence. Nothing else is required. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to change. Only the recognition of what is already the case. And that recognition is available in every moment, to everyone, without exception, because it is the recognition of what you cannot not be. You are reality. Accept this. And in accepting this, everything is accepted.